Black Ledger, the channel that doesn't take the official story at face value. Today we're tackling a question that shouldn't exist in a modern financial system. What does the security camera clip show that the ledger can't explain? Where did the money go? A 5-second timestamp, a door, a handoff, and a claim stamped in filings that says the money moved for routine services. But the clip shows a moment that looks like a transfer, not a receipt of paperwork. In other words, the trap snaps shut when the footage contradicts the story the ledger tries to sell. Before we go any further, here's our discipline. Footage never explains intent by itself. A camera doesn't read your contracts. But video can still do something powerful. It can constrain timelines, identify parties, and reveal sequences. So we'll use what I call the ledger match test. If filings say transaction A happened, then the clip's time window should align with the same vendor, the same amount range, and the same order in the payment sequence, give or take standard settlement delays. If those elements don't line up, the ledger narrative is missing something. Now, how does dark money routing make disappearing funds possible without literally leaving a bank account? In plain terms, layering, pay-to-play routing, and deliberate breaks in the paper trail. Layering means money is moved through multiple intermediaries until the original source becomes hard to trace. Pay-to-play routing means the intermediaries are friendly organizations selected through political or procurement channels, often with vague deliverables. And deliberate breaks happen when documentation is replaced with reimbursements, consulting language, or new invoices that rename the same underlying purpose. Let's anchor this with 3 document fragments, because this case isn't about vibes, it's about mismatches. First, a stamped invoice fragment, service date claimed. Second, a bank statement fragment, outgoing transfer amount and receiving institution. Third, a filing excerpt, the asserted rationale tied to a funding batch. Here's the key. We label each item against the clip-derived window. Vendor stamp against the time on video shows match. Invoice date against the bank statement shows no match. Filing rationale against the sequence, what was said should have happened first versus what video indicates, shows no match. That's not proof yet, but it's the first crack. Now the clip-to-ledger confrontation. The camera timestamp places a handoff event in a tight window, 2 minutes before a scheduled processing note and after the last confirmed receiving action in a stated batch. If the official narrative is accurate, the batch should reflect payment processing that corresponds to the vendor in the invoice fragment. Same vendor name, same approximate amount. But when we map the ledger batch, the amount is close while the vendor is different. Or the vendor matches while the sequence is reversed. Or the sequence matches, but the invoice's stamped service date falls outside the clip's window. In this case, the mismatch is specific. Either the amount range doesn't tighten with the video window, the vendor identity changes between documents, or the order of events doesn't match what the narrative requires. That's the ledger's blind spot. It can't explain a real-world moment that happened when its story says nothing operative occurred. So where does vanishing money usually go once it leaves the cleanest line in the ledger? Here's the red string map concept. Funds move from a primary account to a friendly intermediary entity, an entity that looks legitimate on paper. Then the money reroutes, sometimes into fees described as professional services, sometimes into reimbursement structures, and sometimes into accounts that are technically separate but operationally connected. What makes it feel like money disappears is not that it disappears from records, it's that the records begin to describe a different transaction than the one the clip suggests was carried out. The camera's key detail isn't just that someone entered a door, it's the handoff, receipt, credential moment, an access event that lines up with a transfer. In the official narrative, paperwork should have been collected or processed after the payment. In the footage, the operational moment arrives first, before the claimed documentary steps. That inversion is the heart of the controlled disbelief. The viewer sees the trap snap shut because the clip doesn't merely support a story, it forces the story to bend. Now, push back. Alternative explanations matter. Timing coincidence is one. Missing context is another. Maybe the video captured an unrelated delivery. Legitimate vendor substitutions can happen too. Vendors change names, services get rebid, invoices are corrected. Here's why those alternatives fail our ledger match test. Coincidence would have to consistently produce synchronized mismatches across vendor identity, amount alignment, and sequence order. Missing context would need to account for why the filing rationale still claims the same batch is routine and unrelated to the handoff moment. Vendor substitution would need to explain why the invoice fragment and the bank statement fragment cannot be reconciled within normal correction windows. When all three elements resist reconciliation, the story becomes less unconfirmed and more contradicted. So the vanishing points show up where the trail breaks into cash-like movements, off-ledger reimbursements, or relabeled expenses. Consulting becomes a container that absorbs unrelated actions. Reimbursements become a way to pay without a clear deliverable description. And intermediaries become the buffer that converts a traceable transfer into a fog of plausible paperwork. What can investigators prove from video plus filings? They can prove that a transfer-like operational event occurred during a specific window. They can prove that the ledger narrative requires a different sequence, vendor, or amount mapping. They can prove which documents align under the ledger match test and which do not. What remains disputed is intent. Video rarely provides motives and causation, whether the handoff caused the payment or merely coincided with it. But disputed intent doesn't erase unexplained inconsistency. And that's what to watch next. If future cases show similar clip-to-ledger inversions, that pattern is evidence of structure, not accident. If corrections appear, amended filings, restamped invoices, revised vendor names, watch whether the revisions fix the mismatch or simply redraw the boundary of what the ledger claims. So here's the question you came for. Where did the money go? The answer isn't it vanished into nothing. The answer is that it rerouted through layers that turn real-world handoffs into paper stories. Stories the ledger tries to enforce after the fact. The security camera shows the timing of the action. The ledger can't explain that specific timing without changing at least one core element. If you want the full breakdown of the clip window, the batch mapping logic, and the ledger match markers, subscribe to Black Ledger. And comment with the one mismatch you think matters most: amount, vendor, or sequence.